The dollar is dying. Not slowly, not gradually. Right now, in real time, the world's reserve currency is experiencing what can only be described as a controlled demolition. And if you're holding your wealth in dollars, you need to understand what's happening before it's too late. Let me show you something that should terrify every American. Central banks around the world just completed their largest gold buying spree in over 50 years. We're not talking about a few extra tons here and there. We're talking about a coordinated, aggressive accumulation that signals one thing. They know something you don't. The numbers are staggering. Central banks added over 1,000 tons of gold to their reserves in recent quarters. That's the kind of buying we haven't seen since the 1970s, right before gold exploded from $35 an ounce to $850. But here's what makes this different. What makes this truly unprecedented? They're doing it while gold is already at all-time highs. Think about that for a second. Central banks, the most sophisticated financial institutions on the planet, are paying record prices for gold. They're not waiting for a dip. They're not dollar cost averaging. They're buying with urgency. Why? Because they understand that at any price, gold is cheaper than what's coming. China's central bank has been on an absolute tear, month after month of relentless accumulation. But here's the fascinating part. Many analysts believe the official numbers are just the tip of the iceberg. There's strong evidence suggesting China is buying far more gold than they're reporting, routing purchases through Hong Kong, through private entities, through channels that don't show up in the official data. Russia, despite being under the most severe sanctions in modern history, continues to accumulate gold. India, Turkey, Poland, Singapore, the list goes on. These aren't random countries making random decisions. This is a coordinated move away from dollar dependence. They're building a lifeboat while the ship is still afloat. But let's talk about what's really driving this. Let's talk about the elephant in the room that nobody in mainstream media wants to address. The dollar's weaponization has backfired spectacularly. For decades, the dollar's reserve currency status was America's superpower. Countries needed dollars to trade oil, to settle international transactions, to hold as reserves. It gave the United States an extraordinary privilege, the ability to print money and export inflation to the rest of the world. But then something changed. The U.S. government started using the dollar as a weapon. Sanctions, asset freezes, cutting countries off from the SWIFT payment system. And the world watched. They watched as Russia's dollar reserves were frozen overnight. They watched as the U.S. could simply decide to make a country's dollar holdings worthless with the stroke of a pen. That's when the light bulb went off for every finance minister, every central banker, every sovereign wealth fund manager on the planet. If it can happen to Russia, it can happen to anyone. Your dollar reserves aren't really yours. They're on loan, subject to the political whims of Washington. So they started looking for alternatives. And there's only one asset with a 5,000-year track record of holding value that no government can freeze, that no politician can devalue with a signature: gold. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are actively working on alternative payment systems. They're settling trade in their own currencies. They're building infrastructure that bypasses the dollar entirely. And every single one of these initiatives has gold at its foundation. Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar system, just let their 50-year agreement with the United States expire. For half a century, the Saudis agreed to price oil exclusively in dollars in exchange for U.S. military protection. That agreement, which underpinned the entire dollar reserve system, is over. The Saudis are now accepting yuan, euros, and other currencies for oil. The petrodollar is dead. Let that sink in. The single most important pillar supporting dollar dominance just collapsed, and most Americans have no idea it even happened. Now, here's where this gets personal. Here's where this moves from geopolitical chess game to your retirement account, your savings, your financial future. The Federal Reserve is trapped. They've painted themselves into a corner with no good options. Inflation is still running hot despite their claims of victory. The official numbers say inflation is around 3%, but anyone who buys groceries, pays rent, or fills up their gas tank knows that's a fantasy. Real inflation, the kind you experience in your daily life, is running much higher. But the Fed can't raise interest rates anymore. Why? Because the U.S. government is now paying over $1 trillion a year just in interest on the national debt. Every quarter-point rate increase adds tens of billions to that burden. At some point, and we're approaching it fast, the interest payments become unsustainable. The government literally cannot afford higher rates. So what's the alternative? They'll have to cut rates, they'll have to print more money, they'll have to inflate away the debt. It's the only way out. And when that happens, when the printing presses fire up again, the dollar's purchasing power will crater. This is why gold has been surging. It's not speculation, it's not a bubble. It's a rational response to an irrational monetary system. Gold has climbed over 50% recently, hitting record after record, and it's not done. Not even close. Let me paint you a picture of what's coming. Imagine you're a pension fund manager. You've got billions of dollars in treasury bonds, the supposedly safest investment in the world. But you're watching the dollar weaken. You're watching inflation eat away at your real returns. You're watching other central banks dump treasuries and buy gold. At what point do you make the switch? At what point does the risk of not owning gold become greater than the risk of owning it? That's the calculation happening right now in boardrooms around the world. And when those institutional floodgates open, when pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and insurance companies start rotating even a small percentage of their portfolios into gold, the price will move in ways that will shock people. We're talking about trillions of dollars potentially chasing a relatively small market. The entire above-ground gold supply is worth around $15 trillion. The global bond market is over $130 trillion. If just 5% of that bond money moves into gold, you're looking at a price explosion that will make the 1970s look tame. And here's the thing about gold that most people don't understand. It's not an investment, it's insurance. It's the fire extinguisher you hope you never need but are damn glad you have when the house is burning down. Quick aside here, because this is important. If you're sitting on $100,000 or more in retirement accounts, traditional IRAs, 401ks, you need to understand that you can hold physical gold in those accounts. It's called a gold IRA, and it's one of the few ways to get real asset protection inside a tax-advantaged retirement account. I put together a free guide that explains exactly how it works, how to do it without triggering taxes or penalties. It's in the description below. Worth checking out if you're serious about protecting your retirement from what's coming. All right, back to the bigger picture. Let's talk about the supply side of this equation, because that's where things get really interesting. Gold production has essentially plateaued. The easy gold has been mined. The low-hanging fruit is gone. Every new ounce that comes out of the ground is more expensive, more difficult, more energy-intensive than the last. Mining companies are struggling to replace reserves. The big discoveries aren't happening anymore. Meanwhile, demand is exploding. Central banks are buying at record levels. Asian consumers, particularly in China and India, have a cultural affinity for gold that Western investors often don't appreciate. When times get uncertain, they buy gold. When they get wealthier, they buy more gold. And there are billions of them entering the middle class. Then you've got the industrial demand. Gold isn't just jewelry and bars. It's in your phone, your computer, your car. As technology advances, as we build out renewable energy infrastructure, as we develop new electronics, gold demand from industry continues to grow. You've got a supply that can't increase meeting a demand that's accelerating. That's not a recipe for stable prices. That's a recipe for a moonshot. But let's talk about the paper gold market, because this is where things get truly wild. The COMEX, the major exchange where gold futures are traded, operates on a fractional reserve system. For every ounce of physical gold in their vaults, there are dozens, maybe hundreds of paper claims on that gold. It's like a bank that only keeps a tiny fraction of deposits on hand, assuming not everyone will want their money at the same time. It works fine until it doesn't. Until there's a run. Until everyone shows up demanding physical delivery. And that's exactly what's starting to happen. More and more futures contracts are being stood for delivery. More and more investors are saying, I don't want your paper promise. I want the actual metal. The COMEX is hemorrhaging physical gold. Their inventories are dropping. And if this trend continues, if we get to a point where they can't meet delivery demands, the entire paper gold market could implode. When that happens, when the world realizes that most gold ownership is just digital entries in a database backed by a fraction of the actual metal, The scramble for physical gold will be unlike anything we've ever seen. The premium for physical over paper will explode. And if you're holding paper gold, ETFs, futures contracts, you might find out the hard way that you don't actually own what you thought you owned. This is why smart money is moving into physical gold, bars, coins, allocated storage where you own specific identified pieces of metal, not shares in a fund, not a futures contract, the actual thing. Let me tell you a story that illustrates where we are right now. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. He ended the convertibility of dollars into gold, effectively defaulting on America's promise to foreign central banks. At the time, gold was $35 an ounce. The world was told this was temporary. It wasn't. The world was told the dollar would remain strong. It didn't. Over the next decade, gold went from $35 to $850. That's a 24x increase. People who understood what was happening, who saw the writing on the wall, who moved their wealth into gold before the crowd, they didn't just preserve their purchasing power, they multiplied it. We're at a similar inflection point right now. The difference is, this time it's not just the US ending gold convertibility. This time, it's the entire world ending dollar dependence. The implications are far more profound. Think about what the dollar's reserve currency status has meant for Americans. It's meant cheap imports. It's meant the ability to run massive trade deficits without consequence. It's meant living beyond our means for decades. When that privilege ends, and it is ending, the standard of living adjustment will be severe. Prices for imported goods will soar. The cost of everything from electronics to clothing to food will spike. The government will have to actually pay for its spending instead of just printing money and having the world absorb the inflation. It's going to be painful. But here's the thing. This isn't a prediction. This isn't speculation about what might happen. This is already happening. The dollar's share of global reserves has been declining steadily. International trade settled in dollars is dropping. The infrastructure for a post-dollar world is being built right now. The question isn't if this transition happens. The question is how fast and whether you're positioned for it. Gold is the obvious answer. But let's talk about why it's not just about gold going up. It's about the dollar going down. It's about purchasing power. It's about what your money can actually buy. If gold goes to $5,000 an ounce, that sounds great. But what if bread is $20 a loaf? What if gas is $15 a gallon? The nominal price of gold matters less than what it can purchase. And throughout history, gold has maintained its purchasing power while currencies have collapsed. An ounce of gold could buy a fine suit in Roman times. It can buy a fine suit today. That's 2,000 years of purchasing power stability. Can you say the same about any currency? Can you say the same about the dollar? The wealthy understand this. The ultra-rich, the billionaires, the family offices that manage generational wealth, they're not debating whether to own gold. They're debating how much. They're moving significant portions of their portfolios into hard assets, into things that can't be printed, that can't be devalued by central bank policy. Meanwhile, the average American has almost no gold exposure. Their wealth is in their home, which is priced in dollars. Their retirement is in stocks and bonds, priced in dollars. Their savings account, priced in dollars. They're all in on a currency that's losing its status, that's being actively replaced, that's backed by nothing but faith in a government that's $35 trillion in debt. That's not a diversified portfolio. That's a bet, a massive concentrated bet on the dollar. And it's a bet that history suggests you're going to lose. Here's what keeps me up at night: the speed at which this could unravel. Currency crises don't happen in slow motion. They happen fast. Confidence is a funny thing. It's there until it's not. And when it goes quickly. Look at what happened to the British pound after World War II. Britain was the global superpower, the pound was the reserve currency, and within a few years, it was over. The transition from pound to dollar as the world's reserve currency happened faster than anyone expected. The same thing could happen to the dollar. One day you wake up and oil is priced in yuan. Trade is settled in a basket of currencies. The dollar is just another currency, no longer special, no longer privileged. And on that day, the flood of dollars coming back to America, the inflation that's been exported for decades coming home to roost, it will be devastating. This is why central banks are buying gold with urgency. They're not trying to time the market. They're trying to get positioned before the crisis hits. They're building their lifeboats while the ship is still floating. You should be doing the same thing. Not with all your wealth, nobody's saying go all in on gold, but a meaningful allocation. Enough that if the dollar does lose its status, if we do see a currency crisis, you've got something that will hold its value. 10% of your portfolio in physical gold is a reasonable starting point. 20% if you're more concerned. Some people are going higher. The exact number depends on your situation, your risk tolerance, your time horizon. But zero? Zero is not a rational position given what's happening in the world. And here's the beautiful thing about gold. You don't need it to go up for it to do its job. If everything stays fine, if the dollar remains strong, if inflation stays low, gold will probably just sit there. You won't make a killing, but you won't lose either. It's insurance. But if things go sideways, if even half of what we've discussed comes to pass, gold won't just preserve your wealth. It will be one of the best performing assets you own. The risk-reward is asymmetric. The downside is limited. Gold isn't going to zero. It's been valuable for 5,000 years. It's not suddenly going to become worthless. But the upside? The upside in a currency crisis, in a dollar collapse scenario, is enormous. We're watching the end of an era. The dollar's 80-year run as the undisputed global reserve currency is coming to a close. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's happening. And the smart money, the people who understand monetary history, who understand how these transitions work, they're positioning now. The final countdown has begun. Not in some distant future, not in some hypothetical scenario. Right now. The central banks are buying. The BRICS nations are building alternatives. The petrodollar is dead. The signs are everywhere if you're willing to look. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to wait until gold is $5,000, $10,000 an ounce and wish you'd acted sooner? Are you going to wait until the crisis is obvious to everyone and the premiums on physical gold are through the roof? Or are you going to do what the central banks are doing, what the wealthy are doing, what anyone who understands monetary history is doing? Are you going to get positioned now while you still can, while physical gold is still available at reasonable premiums? The choice is yours. But understand this. The window is closing. The time to act is not when everyone else figures it out. The time to act is now, while you're still early, while you can still get physical metal without paying massive premiums, while you can still protect your wealth before the crowd realizes what's happening. The dollar's final countdown has begun. Make sure you're ready for what comes next.